the EWTN radio and television studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
So glad that you can be with us here on EWTN Theology Roundtable, coming to you from Radio Studio 1 in our headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama, here on the EWTN campus. Today with a very special topic, very important topic, and we want you to participate and be on the show here with us. Now, normally on a regular Friday on EWTN Radio, you would be listening to EWTN Open Line with Colin Donovan. Today, we bring you Colin Donovan, the head of our Theology Department, the Vice President of Theology here on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, and also joining us here on this special show of EWTN Theology Roundtable. With us and with Colin Donovan are theology advisors Noah Lett and Laura Dittus to speak about a very important topic. And thank you very much for your time and preparation. Where else can you get theology experts to answer your questions? And our specific topic today is going to be the principles that should inform the Catholic vote. So we're going to be opening up our phone lines. They are open right now. I will give you that number in just a moment. Our brave call screener, Matt Gubinski, please pray for him. He is recovering from an illness. And Michael McCall is stepping in as our call screener to talk to you, to welcome you to ask your questions and give us your comments about the principles that should inform the Catholic vote. The number is 1-800-585-9396. It's toll free, 1-800-585-9396. If you are joining us outside the United States and or Canada, we have a line for you as well, and that international line is country code 1, then 205-271-2985. Our international number again is 1, country code 1, 205-271-2985, and we want to hear your questions about, not so much about the issues themselves, but about how you go into the thinking process and picking the way you're going to vote. For instance, if you're in a cafeteria and you have salad in front of you, you have a hot dog, you have a hamburger, well, it's not so much about the hot dog and the hamburger and the salad. It's about how you go about picking. What principles do you use? What theories do you use? What are your motivations to pick between that hot dog, that salad, and that other hamburger? So did I put it correctly, Colin? Is this the way we go?
Well, yeah, sort of like that, because we're called to make a judgment. That's what voting is. Voting is a judgment that I want this individual to represent me and my opinions, my idea what's true, important, and valuable, good, and so on, in the decision-making process of our government. And of course, in a democracy, this is more important than, if you were in a monarchy of the past where the decisions were made by the monarch, the nobles, and so on. That wouldn't be so important. But here it is important because we have to make these decisions conscientiously to pick individuals who are going to represent our views. Now, voting is an individual matter. Of course, we're all used to the idea that you can go in and vote for a party, and a party, pull a lever if you want to vote all Republican or all Democrat or whatever, then you can do that. And there you want to look at what the party platforms are saying. But when you're choosing somebody who represents you in a specific fashion as an individual candidate and not just as part of a party platform, you want to be very particular. You want your vote to be for a worthy person. Mm-hmm. You want your vote for that person who represents your views, as you would in the case of any candidate. So I think our election cycle this year, as many people have noted, so this is not news to anybody, places some difficult choices on people as to who to vote for. As Archbishop Chaput has said, the both major candidates in the presidential race, would be difficult for a lot of people to choose. There are other candidates running as well. Can you just choose any one who, well, I think this person will do a better job? You can, but there is a precise logic that you should go through. And so we're gonna undertake that, and I'll sort of introduce that right now in terms of some of the things that matter. And just this sort of a summary, because we want to make a certain concentration today on a particular area of the kinds of issues that we face in our country and would face in any country. The first thing is Catholics have an obligation to form their consciences by church teaching. Conscience is not about being autonomous and able to make a judgment about good and evil yourself. You Catholics need to look to the church for the judgment of what is good, what is evil. And so we do that by coming to understand how the church, the church thinks is good and evil. We do that by learning the principles that we should be applying in voting. We do that by learning also, of course, the various issues and what the church has to say on those issues. And typically we're mostly concerned with what the magisterium, and the magisterium is the papal magisterium or of an ecumenical council, which are both supreme magisteriums. And then to a lesser extent, we take into consideration the bishops' conferences and then our individual bishop and so on. And these are things we can and ought to consider. But there are some perennial principles in morality that we should always consider. And one is that in voting, and in anything else we do, there has to be goodness in the object, the thing that is to be done. There has to be goodness in the intention or the end, the purpose for which it is done. There has to be goodness within the circumstances. So I sometimes use as example that a priest says Mass, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. He does it for the glory of God. That's a very good thing. Does that mean if he says Mass for the glory of God in the middle of Old Leeds Road, that's a good thing? No, that's not a good thing. So circumstances can change and even destroy just as a bad motive, like, to do it for self-glory. So that's why those three things are important. There has to be prudence, and St. Thomas gives us 8 things that we would consider in prudence, and maybe if we get a question on that, we'll go into it. When we do a good act, we should not ever cooperate in evil. We should not ever intend evil or assist evil. So let's take the issue of abortion. If somebody, favors abortion or something like that, we can't say, well, I'm voting for that person because they're pro-choice or they're tolerant of abortion. Not that anybody says, let's go out and multiply the number of abortion for its own sake, but that, it's not that important. Women make that decision. That's not an acceptable Christian position or Catholic position, certainly. So you can't intend that, foster it, favor it, propagandize for it, or provide material support, giving money to a candidate because they're going to go out and they're going to get women, to get free abortions or something like that. That would not be a legitimate thing to seek. We know that as citizens, we've talked about this, we have a co-responsibility for society. But here is where I think the nub is, and I think where a lot of people are today in terms of where to vote. If you think that all of the candidates are not good, and they all embrace something which as Catholics we don't agree with, and this is typically true in any election. It's not like this is unique in that way. Where is the perfect candidate? I've never seen Jesus' name or Mary's name on a slate of candidates. Where is the perfect candidate? They aren't. So it's a choice about goods where you sometimes tolerate evils. You're choosing an individual because they're a worthy candidate and you tolerate their evils if there is a proportion between those evils and the good you expect this candidate to do. And we need to talk about proportion and what that means. So it's not simply we need to vote. We certainly need to vote for the most worthy candidate, but we sometimes have to choose to vote to exclude the least worthy candidate who has a chance of being elected. This is the logic of the Catholic moral theology tradition, that we actually have this obligation, that if a candidate is an enemy of religion, morality, freedom, those are 3 things which can actually oblige us to go and vote against that candidate. which means to vote to elect another candidate, not for the evil he or she might do, but to exclude the candidate most opposed to the values that we as Catholics cherish and ought to hold as the highest values. So I think this is the crux of the issue, an intended connection there between the cross and this having to make these difficult decisions. But I think that's where the voting question lies for most of us. Which is the candidate who, on the more important issues, will do the most damage to life, marriage, religion, and we'll get into what those three entail. Who do we vote for that has a possibility of excluding that candidate? So I think when we come back, we want to break those categories down a little bit to the negotiables and the non-negotiables, an expression that Cardinal Ratzinger, back in the early part of the last decade, coined, and which is Pope Benedict XVI, he pressed very strongly in some of his addresses, and we can take that up after the break.
What are those negotiables and non-negotiables? We are having our experts here on EWTN Theology Roundtable joining us to discuss that. Colin Donovan, Noah Lett and Laura Dittus, right here on EWTN. You can call in with your questions, 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. We have Joseph and Dan holding. We'll be coming to you in just a moment. EWTN Theology Roundtable continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.
From the Dominican House of Studies, Father Dominic Legg.
Sometimes you hear politicians say things like, I'm personally opposed to this, but in effect, I'm going to vote in favor of it. That doesn't work as a political philosophy, and it doesn't work not only for politicians, but also for us as voters. When you go into the voting booth, you are engaging in a serious act of political responsibility. And what you do there is your act. If you say, I'm personally opposed, but I'm voting in favor, you are, in fact, in favor. So let's pray for the grace to this year live out and vote our consciences faithfully. When we stand up for what is right, we make our nation stronger.
For a guide to Catholic teaching and voting, visit EWTN.com/vote.
Augustine Institute Radio Theater presents Brother Francis, the Barefoot Saint of Assisi.
I am Samarius. You don't know me, nor want to. Well, that's all right, I don't know you, nor want to. But you asked about Francis, and I'll tell you what I know. When I met him, I considered him a fool. When I left him, I still considered him a fool. But he'd become a different sort of fool.
Brother Francis, the Barefoot Saint of Assisi, this Sunday night, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
EWTN Theology Roundtable continues with the topic, the principles that should inform the Catholic voting, the voting of Catholic citizens, with our experts here, Colin Donovan and Noah Lett and Laura Dittus, answering your questions. This is Elena Rodriguez, also reminding you that you can submit your questions via text message. Yes, you can. And what you do to get that accomplished is you send the letters EWTN to 55000. So send the letters EWTN to 55000 and then follow the instructions and send in your questions. What are those negotiables and non-negotiables? We're also taking your questions through the phone lines, 1-800-585-9396. And we have Joseph ready here to ask the question and open up the show. And he is from Germantown, Maryland, listening to EWTN Radio through the Guadalupe Radio Network. Joseph, what is your question for Colin? Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. My question is, my wife and I are considered to be strong practicing Catholics, and did a talk last week at our local church, and we were talking about how important it is right now, we're only a couple weeks away to vote for the President of the United States, how important it is to explain to other people and other Catholics how important the non-negotiables are. But it seems like people don't want to listen to them because there's issues in their life that create more suffering, more discomfort, more pain, that they're more focused upon wanting to talk about economics and other issues, and the 5 non-negotiables seem to somehow take a background, and unfortunately I don't think we hear it enough from the pulpit. So part of my question is, why aren't we hearing more of that spoken about weekly or daily from the pulpit about the 5 non-negotiables, so that we can become better educated as Catholics, so we can go out and speak about our faith to educate those people that don't know the correct way to vote.
Okay. Let me start by something we'd intended to do, and that is, before we answer your question, Noah, give us a summary of what a non-negotiable is, and what at least in the papal. Now, you mentioned 5, and I know some people admit we're going to stick with what Pope Benedict has listed as the 3 areas. Go ahead.
The Benedict document is from 2006, March 30th. You can find it under Benedict the 16th in his address. If you go to the website for the Vatican. But let's talk about what non-negotiables are. This is not This is not things we're stubborn on. We're just stubborn because we want them. Non-negotiables refer to those things which must be true first before other things can be done. In this case, we're talking about the right to life. If you don't have the right to live, how can all the other things that can be accumulated for your good come to you? Mm-hmm. So you see how life must be first as something you protect before you can talk about other things that we can debate about, whether to let them go to college free or make them pay. On the other hand, we have realization that right now we're struggling with regard to the issue of the family. This issue about what the family is not based upon the church's point of view, but is based upon what we have seen throughout human history, that a family is one man, one woman, and that must be protected, because from the family comes a society, from the family come the children, and that if we make the point of view, we have a point of view that says, we can make it so that a family is other than a one man and one woman. What you are dealing with here is you're trying to change something that's non-negotiable. We must have people who are in evolution should understand this, right? Because other kinds of marriages do not give the species a chance to survive, right? You get children from a family. And the other thing that we would pay attention to...
And the fact that today we can concoct children in the laboratory... That's an exception in history, and it's a gravely immoral one. Mm-hmm. So you can't say, 3 people can have children, or 2 men or 2 women, or 2 men and a woman, because of technology. Mm-hmm. Naturally, no. God and nature has given us a way to have children, and a way to raise children within the love and embrace of the natural parents. Everything else is an exception and a violation of that, whether sinful because somebody ran off with a secretary and divorced their wife, whatever. Those are sinful things. By itself, you need those parents.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. And the third thing that we pay attention here is the right to conscience. The ability to be true to my conscience, which I am trying to educate. As Christians, we understand that we might have become a Christian as an adult, and we might have been voting one way before becoming a Christian. But because we become a Christian, we evaluate everything in our life and don't just do things the way we did before. We may spend more time with our kids, with our wife, with our mother, our grandmother, and take care of them, because we realize that we must have the mind of Christ and not just the mind we had before we met him. Okay, and so we have to have the right to conscience, and right to conscience means that people should not be coerced to participate in things like abortion and other things like that. If you cannot safeguard the individual conscience, but let the government come in and tell you that what to do over your conscience, are we not losing liberty? That makes America, for example, different from other countries in the recent past.
And all other freedoms, if you talked about you need life first, then that life has to be nurtured and raised within an institution that is suitable to nurture and raise it, and that's the family of a man and a woman that gives them the physical and psychological complementarity that makes for a whole person. And then once you've raised them, to have educated them in values that allow them to make good decisions in their conscience and to follow them without the government saying you can't do that, unless it's something intrinsically evil. Obviously, a religion that calls for human sacrifice is against the natural law. That rules it out right there. But in most other things, you have a legitimate way to decide whether the claim of conscience is correct. Now, those are the non-negotiables. Laura, what are the negotiables?
Okay, so the negotiables is a little bit longer of a list, but we have war and peace, capital punishment, healthcare, economic policy, immigration, and environment. And these are a little bit more complex issues. With something like life, that's always and everywhere the case, that you're to preserve life from conception to natural death. You're to uphold life, and it's fundamental to our society. Whereas these have a bit more going on in how do we decide if we're to go to war, or how do we decide whether the government should pay for health care. So it's not compromising the good of the person in legitimate. There's different ways you could answer those questions well, but at the same time, it's not a matter of intrinsic evils that are being looked at in these.
Right. You're basically saying that, since you brought up healthcare, that some might think, well, a government-run system would be the best, and others would think that no, free enterprise would be the very best way to do it, and a third person or 10 other people may have positions slightly different in between those extremes. The point is the politics of that, if you're all seeking the same end which the church calls for, which is basic health care, not everybody being able to have everything it wants, but basic health care that you need to protect your life, certainly for having children and caring for the children. All of those basic things is what the church says everybody should get. But how to accomplish that is a decision. I think we have a tendency in our politics in the United States, that if you're for government-run health care because nobody else can do it, to demonize the other as money-grubbing capitalists or something like that. Where the truth is going to be in the middle, and you can work out a system that people can agree on that still is a good system, but certainly no intrinsic evils are involved in necessarily in a multiple possible solutions. And that's what the non-negotiables are, isn't it? Right. Or the negotiables rather, that although the values are important and they may reflect certain intrinsic values like life, the political means is not absolutely clear. It's not set by the moral law. It's a matter of compromise, negotiation, of trying to get insights into the truth and how it applies in these circumstances versus those, and ultimately some agreement by legislature or whatever it is. So those are your characters. You've got essential goods on one hand. You've certainly got essential goods underlying the non-negotiable or the negotiables on the other. But you'll have multiple goods to consider and multiple principles of morality to apply. That's not true with life or death. That's not true with natural marriage versus other marriages, so-called marriages. That's not true with religious freedom versus no religious freedom. If you don't have those three, you don't have the others. And an analogy I would use is, if the United States thought that China was an economic threat, and the way to secure the economy of the United States was to nuke China, would that be moral? No. You can't compare the death of thousands or millions to economic issues, no matter how serious or whatever. You show charity and love and you save people in danger, yes, but you can't do a trade-off of dead babies unnatural marriage versus a basket of negotiable issues.
This is EWTN Theology Roundtable, talking about the principles that should inform the voting of Catholic citizens. In a moment, more. 1-800-585-9396.
From EWTN News Nightly in Washington, I'm Jason Calvi with an EWTN News link. Hurricane Matthew slams Florida, leaving more than 500,000 without power. The storm is expected to hit Georgia and South Carolina this weekend. The Nobel Peace Prize goes to Colombian President Santos. It's for his work to end that country's civil war. More than 200,000 Colombians have been killed in the 50-year-long battle. The U.S. Capitol is the backdrop for today's National Rosary Rally. The event marks the end of the 54-day novena for our nation. The Rosary will be prayed for life, marriage, and religious freedom. The Vatican's first ever global conference on faith and sport wraps up today. Sports stars huddled with cultural and religious leaders and even heard from the Pope. I'm Jason Calvi with your EWTN Newslink. Join us this evening for EWTN News Nightly.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The first commandment, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no strange gods before me. In this commandment, God seeks to protect us from false claims to our worship and obedience. And there's a great sad history of people who have trusted in gods other than Him or things other than Him, and the ruin that it has caused. So God is trying to protect us and call us to an absolute trust and obedience of Him. He asks us to trust Him above all things and above all other people or so-called gods. We have to also avoid things like consulting horoscopes, palm reading, clairvoyance, recourse to mediums, any desire to try to control things apart from God. God simply says, trust me, I'm the Lord your God. I am the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no strange gods before me.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
Elena Rodriguez here, reminding you can send in your questions and participate on this EWTN Theology Roundtable, talking about the topic of the principles that should inform the Catholic voting, the voting of Catholic citizens here on EWTN with our experts Colin Donovan, Vice President of Theology here at EWTN, and with our theology advisors Noah Lett and Laura Dittus. You can call in 1-800-585-9396. One line open at this time, and it is the country code 1-205-271-2985. All lines are full. We're going to go immediately to take our questions from our callers. Dan is in Cincinnati, Ohio, listening to Sacred Heart Radio through the EWTN Radio Network. Dan, your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Laura Dittus. Go right ahead.
Hi, Colin. This is Dan from Cincinnati. I'm the guy who commented on your wife's beautiful photograph on the Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
But anyway,
thank you.
You're welcome. Anyway, I was wondering if the fact that medical research has proven the fact that a fetus is a human being is the most, powerful is the word, or is the most appropriate way to argue against pro-choice, an adamant pro-choice person. That's the best I can come up with. I mean,
Well, no, I think the science, when we went in for our two children and they did the DVD they'll do for you of the child in the womb, it's very convicting of the fact that this is really a human life in there, more than a statistic that at 18 days the heart is beating and at this so on and so forth. to see that child. And I think embryology has done a great service to the world. There are no real rational arguments that are that are not utilitarian to defend abortion. No non-utilitarian arguments that defend abortion. Everything is utilitarian. Well, at this point or that point. Well, if you say it's not a life, how do you know when it is a life? If you think if it's a human life coming out, what is it before? It's a human being. It's not a cat, a dog, or a lump of tissue. I don't know, Laura.
And I think
Noah,
too, as the science keeps getting better with sonograms and things, the reality of that life becomes clearer and clearer in 3D. But I think too that if someone's willing to compromise on when a person's a person, that's so fundamental to our society. The gift of personhood and everyone in authority is to keep in mind a just ordering of values. And so if you're willing to set aside the value of a person in order to forward the GDP or your personal career goals, that's really, you really need to keep in mind the truth of the matter, that a life is a life and we need to protect and defend, and there's lots of resources for people in difficult situations too.
You're sometimes out among university students here at UAB and elsewhere in Atlanta where you go sometimes. What do you think, especially we hear so much about the millennials, what do you think is a good argument there if they don't have any religious, they're sort of taught by our culture a utilitarian ethic. Is there anything you find particularly helpful?
I'm thinking in particular of one conversation I had in which I had to remind the student that when you ask the question, is that life, that you're really asking, you're not being scientific. Because a scientific question begins with observing that there is something there, and then you try to find out exactly what it is. What we have is a baby, and that's been the tradition and the science, etc. So they have the burden of proof, I said to them, to show me that that isn't a human being. I don't have a burden to show them that it is, because there is something there. And I don't want to begin with the assumption like we don't know what it is. I'm not going to begin that way. I'm going to begin with the realism that's in front of me. That here is a baby. Maybe I'll holding a baby, or there's a baby over there, and I'll point it out. I'll say, so tell me when, we know what's there, so tell me why that's not life. We have to be clear where the burden of proof is and not let it be on ourselves because we want to buy into some sort of zero-sum skepticism where we're skeptical about everything as the beginning point for having knowledge about it.
That's right.
And I think, too, science would ask the question, is it human? And is it alive?
Well, yeah.
And if you answer yes to both of those questions, then I think it's pretty clear.
The father of modern genetics, they call him, Jerome Lejeune. And he was called to testify in a case in Tennessee, which is interesting given that the Scopes trial on evolution was also in Tennessee, on when life began. It was a man and a woman who had separated, and they were fighting over frozen embryos, a fight that no human being should ever have to make or want to make or ever do make. But yet, so the husband was trying to save them. I think the wife wanted them destroyed. And he had his lawyer brought in Jerome Lejeune to testify. Father of modern genetics, the discoverer of the genetic basis of disease by discovering the connection between trisomy 21 and Down syndrome. And so he showed how, on a scientific basis, from the moment of conception, when that's completed, that process of fusion of the egg and the sperm is completed, you have an individual human life. It's just a matter of adding air, water, nutrition. It will do what it is interiorly programmed to do. And I like the sign that says baby on board, for cars. And I actually saw a T-shirt some woman had. That is so true. Baby on board, think of that. Who's driving the car? The baby is. The baby shuts down the processes that would expel it. The baby changes the mother's physiology. The baby is driving the whole process of pregnancy. The idea that the woman is somehow in charge and has a right to do this, no. God has ordained it, and genetics as well, that baby takes over and he makes the car go where he wants it to go, so that he can get to his destination, which is life outside the womb. Yeah. And to cut that off at any point, is like an IUD in the womb, blowing up that car. Yeah. That's what it is.
We have more calls coming through, and the number you can call right now to be a part of this show is 1-800-585-9396. Also, you can call 1-205-271-2985 here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. We're going to take Marianne's call. She is in the Midwest listening to EWTN radio through the EWTN app, which, by the way, is a free download. Marianne, what is your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Laura Dittus? Go right ahead.
Well, I'm just having a lot of controversy with the non-negotiables and the negotiables being they're in conflict with one another. When capital punishment is on the non-negotiable list, that's when I start to think, well, wait a minute, where does the church stand?
It isn't.
That's one of the negotiables, because the church actually teaches that there are, so Catechism of the Catholic Church 2267 speaks of how the church doesn't exclude recourse to the death penalty. The cases in which we would need to use it in the United States is because of our ability to contain prisoners and things like that. One would argue might be very limited, or at least limited. But at the same time, that's not one of the it's not one of the non-negotiable issues, because there are cases in which you can resort to capital punishment.
It's like the self-defense of the individual or the self-defense of the nation in just war. The society has the right to defend itself against criminals, capital criminals. It must do it with a good motive and in proper circumstances. Mm-hmm. What John Paul II and Benedict and Francis have all been teaching, as well as our U.S. bishops, is that the circumstances get ever narrow where it is a proportionate to the need to do it. Mm-hmm. So somebody breaks into your house, you can't just shoot them because they broke into your house. Yeah. If they're breaking in and threatening you with a knife or gun, you can defend them even with full force. Mm-hmm. Likewise, a country can defend itself with full force, can't aggressively start a war. Well, likewise with capital punishment. The church is saying the circumstances matter, and in many of the developed countries there is no need to do that. There may be need, and that judgment is the political authorities. Mm-hmm. The difference is a criminal who has received a proper trial and evidence and everything shows it, who is guilty, is not the same as an innocent human being. And the fifth commandment regards the killing of innocent human beings directly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the difference. That's why capital punishment is a negotiable issue, and Cardinal Ratzinger in 2004, writing the U.S. bishops, made the clear distinction that a person who disagreed with John Paul II on the application of capital punishment is in quite a different situation than the person who disagrees with that pope and every pope regarding abortion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's important to recognize that on the issue of capital punishment, this is one of the things where the person must recognize the reason they became Christian is because they want to think with the mind of Christ, with the church. And we have to understand that we have to see distinctions that may not be evident to us on first glance. We observe that someone is in fact dying, and that looks to us like we're not honoring life. But in fact, if you look at the further details that the church herself gives you, you can see here an occasion for a person to think differently, and because they think differently, find greater life and light.
And it's not that you're just choosing to kill someone for the sake of killing them. It's a choice to protect the security of a nation, the security of a community.
And you're using the least force that will accomplish that, because anything beyond it would be a kind of vindictiveness or overkill in that sense. Yeah.
This is EWTN Theology Roundtable. Today, talking about the topic of the principles that should inform the voting of Catholic citizens. We go to Dean, who is in Dallas, Texas, listening to EWTN Radio through the Guadalupe Radio Network. Dean, your question, please go right ahead.
First of all, this is an awesome discussion. Thank you all so much for having this.
You're welcome.
I wanted to, there's talk of the non-negotiables. I had heard and ended up getting this in the mail it was a ministry called Catholic Answers. Y'all are probably aware of it. Mm-hmm. And there was a voter's guide in there which listed the 5 now, but then they talked in the radio show now that there's a 6th non-negotiable. And those non-negotiables are abortion, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, euthanasia, and so-called same-sex marriage. And then now the 6th one is religious liberty. And obviously, no question, those hold primacy over everything. Also, to the point that you mentioned earlier about the issue with capital punishment, in that same little pamphlet, there was a quote by Cardinal Ratzinger before he became Pope Benedict XVI to the fact that, in so many words, that you can still be at odds with the Church on capital punishment. You can still be per se in favor of it, and yet you'd still be okay to receive communion. Sadly, that statement and that quote is not talked about as much, in your average Catholic circles, and maybe it's because it goes against the narrative or the template or whatever. But I wanted to add something else. Obviously, that's not important as important as these 6. But I think it's important. This is a good thought too. Is lower taxes, and now, but when it's done right. And what I mean by when it's done right is taxes ought to be lowered for families who, obviously, primary consideration is given to husband, wife, children over, let's say, a bunch of single people. And that is a godly, I would argue, a godly and a biblical thing as well. And just wanted to point that out too. There was something else I was going to mention, and then I lost the train of thought on it. But
well, maybe it'll come to you. Let's get to some of the ones you mentioned. I understand about the Catholic Answers list. We're going with the Pope's list because, for instance, life regards all of those. The life issue means life versus death, which means killing the innocent in the womb, killing the innocent elderly. Yes. It means euthanasia, whether self-chosen, medically given, or enforced because you're senile, or any kind of killing of the innocent, which means the embryo manipulation because they create a human being to destroy its embryonic stem cell acquisition because they create a human being in order to get the stem cells. All of those things are against life. So as technology advances, you could be adding innumerably to the non-negotiables. So the issue is the life and death. The issue is the marriage, and the issue is the freedom, because those are at the basis of society. Mm-hmm. Tax levels are negotiable. They will never be non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Although your point about families, yes, one of the considerations of taxes very definitely ought to be what support or destruction does the tax policy have on marriage and family. That's a very important element of that policy, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, it's really important to keep your structure of government in mind. The structure is the government's to be at the service of the people of society, and so so when those in authority are making decisions about taxes and things like that, they have to keep in mind: is my choice about taxes at the service of the family, at the service of the person? And so while economics are on the negotiable list, at the same time, these are things that those in authority need to be keeping in mind.
Yeah, so. Absolutely.
Certainly we'd all like to have our taxes lowered wherever we are. And again, this is an example where our motive for self-interest of a negotiable has to give way to the greater common good and interest of the non-negotiables. That yes, I need to give way on voting for somebody who will lower my taxes, even though everybody else's is raised, to voting for a candidate who will support the 3 non-negotiables, which are non-negotiable because they are necessary for human flourishing, like air, like water. And so, right now in the ecology movement, they're basically telling us, wait, It's non-negotiable. You cannot put toxic waste in the water or in the air or so on. This is non-negotiable. You can't do it. We have to understand that while the ecology is important, it is more important for us to consider the human being as someone who, in fact, it is non-negotiable to put toxic stuff in a human being, to kill them, to prevent marriage between a man and a woman.
Which is the basis of why it can't be put in the water as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. So anyway.
And here on EWTN Theology Roundtable, want to offer another additional resource for you to inform the principles of your Catholic vote, and that is the website EWTN.com/vote. I'm looking at it right now. It is full of good resources and reading material with which to inform yourself.
And we should caution the listeners and viewers, too, that probably by the time this airs, that will have been renovated. It's very colorful and full of information
right
now. And we've been doing a revision of it, which should be up sometime next week. So by the time it airs on TV, you'll be able to go there and see the new renovated website, which has a lot of moral guidance, because as fascinating as it is to listen to commentators, whether us or others, talk about the issues, you need to start with fill your head with the knowledge regarding what is important in voting, so that you can make the judgment. These are the 2 points Aquinas makes on prudence. Things that improve your knowledge of the principles and the circumstances in order to guide your judgment, and you're looking out into the future that if I make this decision, what obstacles will I encounter? So in voting, you might say, if I vote for this person, will I be contributing to the election of that person? That's a foreseeable consequence, and we are responsible before God for foreseen consequences. Now, if we vote for somebody and just so happens that a million other people vote the other way and somebody else gets elected, that may not be our fault. We made the best decision. The decisions of other people we're not responsible for. We're responsible for our decision. So the website will have a lot of information on the nature of the good act, the nature of moral cooperation and evil, the nature of the principle of double effect, which it allows us to do something for its good ends, good purposes, that incidentally and not wanted by us has a bad fruit. And the proportionality that's needed in order to justify that. And this is where negotiables and non-negotiables. There is no proportion. None whatsoever. You can never have a basket of negotiable issues that is worth one human life intentionally taken. Just can't.
This is EWTN Theology Roundtable with Colin Donovan, Lett and Laura Dittus. We go to Ann, who's listening in Manassas, Virginia, to EWTN Radio through the Guadalupe Radio Network. Ann, your question, we only have 4 minutes, so please be quick.
Okay. I was just hoping you could address the people who say they don't like either candidate and they're not going to vote at all.
Well, I guess it's putting these principles to work, because an election's going to happen and someone's going to be the leader, and so it's a matter of choosing what's best for society. It's choosing in accordance with the non-negotiables, and also sometimes it's a matter of humility too. I may not like either person, but at the same time, it's a matter of choosing who's gonna fit best with these criterias.
We've got to make a choice.
Yeah.
We have to make a judgment, and we have to make it well and prudently, and it has to be for the intention of getting somebody who is, if they're not worthy, at least the least unworthy electable person. And I think that excludes some candidates, and it also excludes not voting. One could, as what's called a moral impossibility, I just can't bring myself to vote for him or her. One could have that. But that's like scrupulosity. That's a weakness. That's not to be applauded. A moral impossibility doesn't mean that I'm free to do it. It says there's some obstacle in me that I haven't removed that allows me to make a conscientiously good moral decision. So I think, yes, it would excuse moral fault. Moral impossibility excuses fault, but it's not at all a desirable situation.
Yes. Yeah. People have to understand that if there are two candidates and there are two more, and you end up voting for one of the lesser two, and then as a result of your not voting, a person comes in that increases death in people, that increases the fact that the children are not allowed to have a mother and a father, would you not say to yourself, oh, what have I done? Oh, what have I done? Yes, you did vote for a third or fourth person, but then you realized if you had voted for the other person who would not have increased death, you would say, I should have done that. Next time you will. Too bad you had to learn this way, but next time you will, because you will see that what you did was not help stop death.
Yeah. I think this is why so many bishops, so many people like our own Michael Warsaw in the National Catholic Register wrote a beautiful editorial on this. Why these three non-negotiables are the most significant issues. I think in the my lifetime, and perhaps in the lifetime of our country, because we are becoming so far away from the principles, as faulty as they were and as poorly put into place, tolerating slavery and many other things, the mistreatment of the Native Americans, although that was a two-way street on occasion. All of those things, notwithstanding that, as Joseph Ratzinger once said, comparing the Constitution of the United States with European constitutions and others, he said that the Constitution of the United States was the closest that any country had come to the natural law understanding of what should be. We got slavery wrong, to be sure.
Yeah.
And we've done many things wrong ever since. But human life is about struggling to get better and better and better. We're now going backwards on life, on marriage and family, and on conscience, especially freedom of conscience. In that respect, today, many people are of the opinion that the schools and the government have the right to tell you how to educate your children and not simply assist you in the education of your children, that the government can tell you what health care you're going to buy and pay for, and that this is not a matter of your moral conscience of what you feel is morally legitimate and not gravely evil. We are going backwards. We have made progress up to now since 1776 and 1789. We are now going backwards, and I think many people see it, and many people see that we have to find a way out of it. And there are choices in this election which will not be the way out of it, and choices which might be the way out of it. It might not, but it's not like we have an infinite amount of time to get out of the quagmire in which we find ourselves.
And we don't have an infinite amount of time. Our show has come to the end. Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Laura Dittus are theologians here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. Thank you very much for talking to us about the principles that should inform the voting of Catholic citizens. EWTN continues with more